The Exodus Israelite warrior. The figure of the Israelite warrior emerges against the backdrop of the Late Bronze Age, a period marked by political instability, technological transition, and the collapse or realignment of major polities in the Eastern Mediterranean. It is within this context, roughly spanning the 13th to 12th centuries BCE, that the Exodus narrative places the Israelites, a people held in bondage in Egypt, then released under divine auspices, and ultimately shaped into a military force during their long journey toward Canaan. The historicity of the Exodus remains debated. While no single archaeological discovery conclusively verifies the biblical account, there is indirect evidence of Semitic populations in the Nile Delta during Egypt's New Kingdom period. Egyptian texts such as the Amarna letters and the papyrus Anastasi VI mention internal unrest, nomadic incursions, and labouring groups of Asiatic origin. These data suggest the plausibility of migration or displacement events that might lie behind the later literary tradition. Whether the Exodus occurred as a single event or reflects a synthesis of several population movements and collective memories, the formative experience of escape, wandering, and gradual militarization remains central to Israelite identity. At the outset, the Israelites were not a professional army. They were a mixed assemblage of clans, possibly including runaway slaves, marginal laborers, and other non-Egyptian groups, bound together more by religious conviction and collective memory than by any military hierarchy. This lack of initial organization would shape their early modes of warfare, which were adaptive rather than strategic, reactive rather than preemptive. Equipment and appearance, material constraints and environmental realities. Understanding the material culture of the early Israelite warrior requires attention to two primary factors: their background as a dispossessed group and the environmental conditions of their journey. Unlike the well-equipped armies of Egypt or Hatti, Israelite fighters were not provisioned by a state apparatus. Their armament was piecemeal, often improvised, and evolved over time as necessity dictated and opportunities arose. Clothing was utilitarian. Most Israelite men would have worn simple wool or linen tunics, belted at the waist, with additional wrappings or cloaks for desert travel. Footwear, when worn, would have consisted of sandals suitable for rough terrain. Head coverings such as cloth wraps were used for protection against sun and wind. There is no indication of standardized military dress. Visual unity, where it existed, likely emerged from shared tribal markers or banners rather than uniforms. Weapons in the earliest phases were likewise basic. Wooden staves served multiple purposes: walking supports, tools, and in times of need, bludgeoning weapons. Slings, made from woven fabric or leather, allowed for ranged attacks using common stones. The sling was particularly valued for its portability and ease of use, though it required skill to be effective in combat. As the Israelites encountered hostile groups, including the Amalekites and Midianites, they would have acquired more advanced weaponry. Short swords and daggers, often of bronze, became increasingly common. Spears, either for thrusting or throwing, were made of wood with bronze or flint tips. Bows and arrows were likely in use by this period as well, though there is no indication of large-scale archery corps in the early Exodus phase. The Israelites lacked the chariots and horse-trained warriors of Egypt. Chariots required significant logistical infrastructure, trained animals, skilled smiths, and road networks, which the Israelites, as a mobile group, could not support. Instead, they relied on foot mobility, knowledge of the terrain, and small group tactics suited to ambushes and defensive engagements. The absence of standardized armor is notable. While bronze or leather scale armor existed in the region, it was expensive and usually reserved for elite soldiers in centralized states. The Israelites, operating without a central treasury or established metallurgy centers, had limited access to such equipment. Defensive gear may have included wooden or leather shields, but even these were probably not in widespread use in the earliest stages. The nature of combat during the Exodus period reflects the Israelites' transitional status from oppressed laborers to organized tribal confederation. Their engagements were often reactive. The first recorded battle in the biblical account occurs in Exodus 17, where the Israelites are attacked by the Amalekites at Rephidim. Here, combat is portrayed as a collective effort, with Moses, Aaron, and Hur playing ritual and symbolic roles, while Joshua leads the men in direct conflict. The narrative underscores divine involvement, but it also implies a growing martial organization with leaders capable of mustering fighting units. These early confrontations likely resembled skirmishes more than formal battles. Terrain played a critical role. Fighting occurred in rocky wadis, hill passes, and desert margins. The goal was not territorial conquest, but survival and safe passage. Surprise attacks, hit-and-run tactics, and group cohesion mattered more than set-piece engagements or formation-based warfare. As the Israelites spent more time in the wilderness and prepared for incursions into Canaanite territory, their military organization became more structured. The Book of Numbers describes a census of fighting men and a tribal encampment arranged around the Tabernacle, suggesting an increasing emphasis on order and readiness. Trumpets, hasoserot, were introduced as signaling devices, Numbers 10:2, indicating an awareness of coordinated movement in battle. However, it would be misleading to depict these early warriors as a disciplined army in the modern sense. Leadership was still charismatic and tribal, with decisions made by elders or by figures such as Moses, whose authority combined religious and military roles. The absence of a king or standing officer corps meant that cohesion relied on shared identity and perceived divine mandate, not professional training. The Egyptian influence: observed, not replicated. Having spent generations under Egyptian rule, the Israelites would have been exposed to aspects of Egyptian military life. Egypt's army during the New Kingdom was among the most advanced in the ancient Near East. It used composite bows, bronze weapons, chariot units, and professional soldiers organized into divisions. Some Israelites may have worked on state construction projects near military facilities or seen Egyptian garrisons in action. Nonetheless, the Israelites did not replicate this model. Several factors prevented direct imitation. First, as a mobile population moving through inhospitable terrain, they lacked the administrative and logistical base needed to support a heavy, centralized army. Second, their society was organized around kinship groups, not a central monarchy. While tribal confederacies could produce effective fighters, they were less suited to the large-scale campaigns typical of Egyptian or Hittite military operations. Third, and perhaps most significantly, Israelite warfare was framed in theological terms. Unlike the Egyptians, whose military campaigns aimed at imperial expansion or resource control, the Israelites conceived of their conflicts as sanctioned or even initiated by their deity. Victories were attributed to divine favor rather than martial superiority. Defeats were interpreted as signs of collective disobedience or a failure of faith. This religious framing influenced tactics and morale. Leaders such as Joshua and later figures like Deborah and Gideon are presented as military figures only secondarily. Their primary qualification was divine selection. The ban, herem, a practice of total destruction of enemy populations and goods, reflects this sacralized approach to warfare. It was not only about defeating the enemy, but also about purging impurity and demonstrating loyalty to Yahweh. By the end of the Exodus period, the Israelites had moved from being an unarmed refugee population to a group capable of waging coordinated tribal warfare. This transformation did not occur overnight. It involved adaptation to environmental conditions, selective incorporation of external influences, and a growing sense of collective purpose underpinned by religious ideology. Their military structure remained informal and decentralized, but it was effective for the kinds of engagements they faced. They were learning to navigate the landscape of the southern Levant, encountering fortified settlements, local warlords, and rival nomadic groups. This period laid the foundation for the more formalized military practices that would emerge during the conquest of Canaan, and later, under the Judges. The early Israelite warrior was not defined by superior technology or disciplined formations, but by resilience, adaptability, and a belief in divine accompaniment. Their experience during the Exodus forged a distinctive martial identity, tribal, pragmatic, and theologically anchored, that would shape Israel's military ethos in the centuries to come.